Welcome to this live stream. I'm delighted tonight to be with Professor James Tor. How are you doing, James?
Fine, thank you.
Now, everybody knows who you are. I can go over, a basic sort of introduction, but before we went live, you said some words which really, it sounded like, it's the sort of thing that reminded me of the Twilight Zone, something I didn't really expect. So you have a bit of history with Pakistan, don't you?
Yes, I've never been there, but I feel as if I've been there. मैं बहुत ही अच्छे उर्दू बोलता हूँ.
जी, आप बिल्कुल बोलते
हाँ जी.
हैं।
So
आप
so
आपको उर्दू किस तरह आती है?
uh, TikTok.
ठीक-ठाक
I
आती
don't
है।
know if I'm saying it right.
No, you are, mashallah. You are. Okay, so there's some basic things. If you were stuck out in a, marketplace in Lahore, I think there's a few phrases you have to help you survive, right?
Yes, I
You
know a few
introduce-
phrases. Mane kana kana,
Yep,
mane pane pina, mane chai pina, mane sona laga haan.
that's it.
That's
Survival
what
and
you have. That's
reproduction.
survival, right?
So
But but
what?
but for your listeners that
Yes,
know Lahore, I
right,
just want you to think about, where Jail Road runs into Varis Road. Think about that area. There's a girls' college there, Canate College, and
right.
across the street from Canate College, there was a mental institution. I don't know if it's still there, still used as a mental institution. But the bus driver used to stop at that stop and he would say, "Everyone off for the mental institution." And all the young ladies at Canate had to get off the bus at that stop. So that's the things that I know. And the reason I know all these things is because I've never been to Pakistan, but I am married to a woman who is from Pakistan, from Lahore. We've been married for 43 years, and we have 4 children, and these are all stories that her brothers have told me, and I just know a few words, and I know the things also that my wife has shouted at my children when they got on her nerves, and those sort of words. So, and the survival words, which I've already told you.
Brilliant, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I'm sure a lot of listeners are going to be taking clips of those words that you just said and making all sorts of memes out of them. People are going to say, this is AI. We can't expect the great Professor James Tor to be, speaking Urdu in a way that's quite understandable. Brilliant. So Professor James is a professor of chemistry at Rice University in Texas. He's a chemist and a nanotechnologist. There's actually a lot of, if I was to go over your education, would actually use up a few minutes. But James, what I wanted to do is ask you questions which haven't been asked, because everyone's seen your work, everyone's seen the thorough research you've been involved in for many, many years. They've seen your rebuttals of those who try and challenge the perspective of intelligent design when it comes in the context of origin of life and other contexts as well. So the first question I want to ask you is, what inspired you to get involved in origin of life studies?
Right. So I'm an organic chemist, and we make molecules. I make molecules for a living. I've been doing organic chemistry for almost 50 years. So for a long time, I've seen the development. I mean, if you've been half a century working in an area, certainly in a scientific area, you see the progress, you see the evolution of a certain area. So I've been in this business a long time. One of the things that you learn is you learn what molecules do and you learn what molecules don't do. So you can show me molecules and you say, would these two react? Would they carry out these reactions? And any synthetic chemist who's been doing this for some time can answer these questions. And so I saw a presentation almost 10 years ago, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, where a gentleman was talking about carbohydrates and the difficulty in the synthesis of carbohydrates, and how carbohydrates every disease in a cell can harken back to a carbohydrate disorder. And so I wanted to try to understand, and I went out on the veranda after that talk. It was in Nice, France, and standing out there was a man named David Berlinski. And David was I was telling David, I said, this is a bunch of nonsense what people have put out there to think that these carbohydrates could have spontaneously formed on their own. And he said, why don't you write an article about it? Because he was the editor of a journal at that time. And he said, why don't you write an article? So I said, okay, maybe I'll look into this. So I did what professors do. I came back and I started looking around at what's the origin of these molecules? What's the origin? And I started asking some of my colleagues, and I would ask them, where did these molecules come from? You guys work in these biological areas. And they all pointed me to a guy named Eschenmoser, who I've known his work since I was a graduate student, a long time. In fact, he just passed away just a couple of years ago at like the age of 98. So I read Eschenmoser's work and I thought, this is nonsense. You can't build things like this to think that this happened on an early Earth. And he tried so hard to make fructose because he wanted to make the sugar that is necessary to build DNA and RNA. And everything he tried, he couldn't make fructose when he was restricting himself to what were molecules that would be presumed available on an early Earth. We can do it with modern techniques, but he couldn't do it. And he ended up failing. And so it was interesting, a comment that he made. It essentially was, we couldn't get what we want, so we wanted what we got. So he was unable, even with all of his ingenuity, to solve this problem. So it was very hard to think about how he might do this. And so I started reading other people's work, and I thought, this is nonsense. None of this would have happened on an early Earth. And it's not like it's that hard to see. Anybody sitting in my chair who's a synthetic chemist would be able to see it. So I wondered to myself, why are the synthetic chemists not saying this? Most of the synthetic chemists were exactly like I was. They had not really investigated this at all. They just assumed that the folks who work in this field accept it, so they must know. Then I looked at the statements that the people who work in this field were making, and they were so off scale, so crazy off scale. And then somebody invited me to give a talk on this. And I gave one talk, and I was invited by the Discovery Institute, and it was at a meeting in a church. The church, it was over a weekend, but it was not during a church service. And I gave this talk, and it just exploded on the internet. And all of a sudden, I found myself embroiled in this, and I wrote an article for Inference magazine, the journal Inference, and that blew up. And now I had a whole community against me. Everybody liked me prior to that, and now nobody liked me.
I can imagine. When you were giving your answer, I can see not only your entry into a field and being passionate about it, but that of many people at the Discovery Institute who, in their own fields, saw absurdity, saw contradiction, saw misleading information, and thought, okay, I need to get into this. And it just haphazardly happened that they happened to get pushed forward into a position in which they were articulating themselves, and then they got a lot of backlash. So that talk of yours that you were referring to, that's well known, and that was obviously the catalyst for you to get involved. I want to also take you a little bit back to the cultural backdrop here. Now, Philip Johnson, one of his sort of quibbles with Darwinism was the cultural impact and the cultural wars that he initiated. And I love one of the examples that he gives about you can't have two masters. Either it's going to be naturalism or theism. And this is in the context of those Christians or Muslims or Jewish people who want to, pander to the Darwinists by, giving into a type of theistic evolution.
Yeah,
And
by
he's
the
saying,
way,
look,
that's
ultimately,
actually that's actually a quote from Jesus. Jesus said you can't have two masters.
oh,
Yeah,
wow.
Jesus
Okay.
in excuse me, in the Sermon on the Mount, he said you can't have two masters. Either you will love the one and hate the other, or you will hate the one and love the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, money. So that was he was modifying a quote from Jesus, actually.
That's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. And it got me thinking about a question. In the context of naturalism and theism, what role does origin of life play as a topic when it comes to the general discussions about atheism and theism? Because it's one of those things I think a lot of people don't think about. So they may look at all of these research papers that you've been publishing and all of the contributions that you've made to your field, and then think, well, why is Paul going on their detour, right, in a different direction and focusing on something that really doesn't have that much of an impact? So what's the cultural consequence of the answers that are being given to the public? And if they go unchallenged, what does it lead to?
Okay, so one of the reasons I could be critical of this is I was not making my money by doing origin of life research. I work in other areas, many other areas, never an origin of life. To this day, I have no grants to do origin of life, so I am free to speak my mind without losing my grants in origin of life. The cultural implications may indeed be great, because I get many people writing to me and they say, they say, I abandoned my faith in college when I started learning about Darwinism, when I started learning about how there were these naturalistic explanations for things, and I thought the Bible is a bunch of nonsense, and so I abandoned my faith. They say, then after hearing my talks, after hearing what I have to say, they're actually returning to the faith. They're returning to their faith because they say that hey, we don't even understand where life comes from. Something so fundamental. From where does life come? We have no idea. Scientifically, we have absolutely no idea. Then there's the whole progress of how does life evolve from that first Luca, that first last universal common ancestor, presume that first cell. How does that go to multicellular organisms and then all the complexity of life that we see today? That's then another big question, and that's where Darwin came in. Darwin never addressed the origin of life. That was an unknown problem for him, and he never tried to touch it. He only addressed the evolution thing. That has its own sets of problems. But I think the philosophical implications are that it sets people to sometimes wander away from God. They'll wander away from God because they'll think scientists understand these things. Scientists understand, and scientists don't understand. There's so many things we don't understand. And as scientists, we are all the more prone to go forward and to act as if we understand these things and speak as if we are understanding these things when we really don't. And I think that it does have a tendency to draw people away from God. I don't know that that's the motivation of scientists. I don't think so. I don't think scientists go in there with the motivation, let me see how many people I can draw away from God today. There are a few of these new atheists that is their very intent, to draw people away from God. And they will speak of anybody who does not embrace the things of science as being idiots, as being stupid, as not understanding science, if they would only understand science. But what you see is that they avoid me because I can call them out on the science, and they all avoid me. So there are new atheists that's their intent. Most scientists, that's not their intent, but that's the outcome, I think.
And you're absolutely correct about the consequence there. I wanted to ask you a question from the perspective of the Muslim world. So, as Muslims, we are watching the debates and the discussions within the Christian community when it comes to Darwinism, because the first group of people that actually had to deal with Darwinism were the Christians. So, in many respects, we are kind of mirroring the segments of Christian society that responded to Darwinism. So you have Muslims who are of the Francis Collins type, who believe in accommodating Darwinism and trying to realign it with our text. Then you have others who believe in intelligent design, like I do, and then you have others who simply are like young Earth creationists, and they will simply not, at all engage with the science in a thorough way. Not exactly young Earth creationism, but you get my point, as in they're just sort of anti-science sort of crowd. If people watching this were to say, well, Sabur, we have Francis Collins and he has one approach. Then you have the ID guys and James Tour and these guys with their approach. Why would anybody choose the approach of Tour over Collins? Because Collins seemed to have built up a level of respect from even new atheists who, are willing to engage with him and willing to talk to him. So what's the harm in just giving in to that type of theistic evolution? We can still keep our faith and we can still be theistic evolutionists. Why are we fighting this particular battle?
I never use the Bible, the authority of the Bible, as my text for saying what my problems are with origin of life and with evolution. I am using strictly the book of nature, the book of science. Just based on the science, I do not understand how life came about. Just based on the science, I don't understand the evolutionary process, how you go from simple structures to more complex structures when you have to have had many concerted lines of evolution occurring simultaneously in the same place at the same time. So for many years, I've said I don't understand this, and I invited colleagues, come forward and explain this to me. You would think here in the university, if somebody could easily explain evolution to me, because of course, an elementary school person can understand evolution, they say. It's a very easy thing. So you would think that I would be able to understand it. And for many years, I put out on my website. I don't even know if it's still there. Maybe it is. If you understand this, I'll take you to lunch and explain it to me, and I'll only ask you questions when I stop understanding. There was one person in decades that came forward, and that was Joshua Swamidass. And so I flew out to Washington University in St. Louis and spent 2 days with Joshua. He is a Christian. We pray together. We're on our knees praying together. This is, and so we have a commonality of faith, but he's like a Francis Collins type. And so he embraces evolution. He's a geneticist, a computational geneticist. And he did the very best he could in explaining to me how these changes occur. And I would say, Joshua, give me more detail. I need to see the chemistry. I need to see the chemistry of what's happening here because I just don't get it. And after 2 days, he did his very best, and I just still couldn't understand the chemistry. But so few of them are willing to engage in a conversation to try to explain it to me because I just don't get the chemistry. And I think if Joshua understood molecules like I understand them, that molecules don't just do these sorts of things on their own. That he'd have more trouble with this. I think most scientists have never thought about it, but it's interesting, Sabur. When I get in the back room, when I get alone in an office with my colleagues, with my synthetic organic colleagues, they are bewildered by this stuff too. They are bewildered by the same things that I find bewildering, because when you deal with molecules, when you understand what they do and what they don't do, it's very hard to see how life originated, and it's very hard to see how you would get these sorts of structures occurring by some evolutionary process. Very difficult. So my argument has never been from the authority of the Bible. My argument has always been the science. But what they will do in order to combat me is they will accuse me of being a religious creationist. Therefore, they don't have to engage me. But it's all a ploy. It's a ploy that they use it as an excuse to not engage me. But it's purely based on the science. I have this trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way that you make a distinction between your personal religious belief and the science that you do, because you are being authentic there and saying, look, I obviously believe in God, but when it comes to my science, I'm only sticking to the science. I'm only sticking to the book of nature. Now, the really interesting debates back in the day between William Provine and Philip Johnson, one of the things that did come out in those discussions is that there is an underlying assumption of naturalism behind the science. So it's not as clear as, oh, the science has led to this conclusion. It's rather the cart is before the horse. We have already decided a priori that there has to have been a naturalistic explanation. As Richard Dawkins calls it, we just need a first stroke of luck, and then we can explain the rest. Can you get a little bit into why that is? Why is it the case that the public doesn't seem to have been told this, and this isn't at the forefront, that this is a pre-gone conclusion rather than something that's arrived from the science?
Yeah, it is not just that one miracle. So most materialists will accept one miracle, and that is the miracle of the Big Bang, where everything comes from nothing. They will accept that. They say, give us the one miracle, and everything took off from there. But that's not the case at all. You have to have had millions and millions and millions of sequential miracles, and then millions of miracles happening at the same time for life to have arisen. And there are many miracles that have to occur. And then when you look at evolution, it is miracles all over again. Miracles have to occur all over again. And you see this with evolutionists. You see the way they teach things, the way they say, they will tell you a story about how something evolved. And you say, well, I can't understand how that can happen because this would block that. And immediately they will say, well, then this could happen. And then you detect immediately, this was a just so story. I just made this up because I can, on a dime, I can turn and give you another explanation. So these are all made up sequences. And yes, it is miracle upon miracle to say there is a materialistic, naturalistic explanation for this. There is not. It is underlying with miracle upon miracle for them. It is not just one little small miracle, as Dawkins might have said, or whoever you were quoting. It's not just that. It is many miracles would have to occur. I mean, I could literally line up thousands of them. I have these 5 questions that I put before Origin of Life people where I said, answer any one of them, and I will take down everything I've ever said about Origin of Life. And people think, oh, well, there are these awesome 5. No, I mean, I just chose those. I chose those in 15 minutes before I had a discussion with a YouTuber on this. And these are 5 of 5,000 that I could come up with. You would need a miracle at every one of these points. So underlying their materialistic explanation is a constant source of miracles.
Yeah, absolutely. I also wanted to highlight, we have secular thinkers who've expressed doubt, and they've pointed out to some issues to do with how freedom of speech is being curtailed due to these naturalistic programs. One of the people I wanted to highlight tonight was Thomas Nagel, who's an atheist, who is a well-known philosopher of science. In his book, Mind and Cosmos, which is published by Oxford University, I'm going to read out a quote. And this is really striking when it comes to the origin of life. He says, whatever one may think about the possibility of a designer, the prevailing doctrine that the appearance of life from dead matter and its evolution through accidental mutation and natural selection to its present forms has involved nothing but the operation of physical law cannot be regarded as unassailable. It is an assumption governing the scientific project rather than a well-confirmed scientific hypothesis. So when it comes to the origin of life, we are often told the scientists have worked it out. It's just a matter of a few details which are missing. And here you have an Oxford published book with an atheist philosopher of science, not only talking about the fact that this is an assumption governing the scientific project. In other parts of the book, he talks about how people have been browbeaten into submission if they don't bow down to the Darwinian cow. So it's not just creationists or intelligent design proponents. It's very hard to explain away the fact that there are great secular thinkers who've actually pointed out the king has no clothes.
Yes, I agree, and they do. It does affect one's career. So, for example, I would not recommend to a young untenured professor to start shouting about their revelations on this, that the emperor has no clothes, until maybe they get tenure on. I say, unless you're willing to really endure this fight, because they take shots at you. They try to cut off your funding, and you say, "Oh, Tour, you're dreaming." No, I'm not dreaming, and I've had 2 program managers from 2 federal agencies tell me in person in my office. They would not even tell me this over the phone, that I need not even apply to their agencies anymore, because at the top I was being cut from my positions on these things, because they want to silence you. What better way to silence Jim Tour than to cut his funding? He can't do any more research, and you cut him off as a professor. So yeah, if you start battling with these things, to come out and to start saying these things is a real problem. Now, what we're seeing, however, is people are starting to rise up a little bit. Dennis Noble, for example, in the UK, he started saying, "Hey, there's real problems here." And but the thing about Dennis, he must be, I don't know, I'm guessing in his 80s, and he doesn't need any more funding. So now all of a sudden he's speaking up. But Nick Lane and uh, is it Joanna Xavier, recently wrote an article in Nature talking about these sorts of problems. Uh, uh, and so people are beginning to point it out. And so and people tell me all the time, Tour, why don't you start publishing articles on this and get peer reviewed? Actually, we're doing it. I've actually published about 5 articles on Origin of Life. I got another one that I'm writing that is already submitted. And so I'm doing these things, but after a while, I'm not even trying to address this to the scientific community anymore, because they have so messed with the minds of the general public. I'm going right after the general public. I'm using social media to go and to correct this, because you may have heard of the surveys we've taken, where we took surveys and we asked the general public, how many of you think that scientists have made frogs in the laboratory, complex organisms like frogs? 1/3 of the general public feels that they have. Then we asked, how many of you think that scientists have made a simple one-cell organism like a bacterium in a laboratory? And 2/3 of the general public thinks that has happened. We are nowhere close to either of those, nowhere close. But they've so deceived the general public, and you see this sort of thing happen. They have one little result in one of their papers, and they blow it up. And then they talk to the press, and the press blows it up again. And it is from that it gets into our textbooks. And this whole idea of a primordial soup, some pool with lightning strikes, molecules randomly came together and formed these cells, and that formed higher organisms. That primordial soup model actually is taught in our elementary schools. This means to children under 12. It's even taught in our advanced university, in our advanced graduate classes, the same primordial soup model, which harkens back actually to the Babylonians. Their gods came out of those ponds, and their people came out of those ponds. And this is actually where it harkens back to. So yes, this has affected their minds. And I'm not even sure what your question was. I think I've lost the stream.
Yeah, well, the question was about religious motivation. So we have secular thinkers who have pointed out the king has no clothes.
Yes, that's right.
Clearly there's a problem.
Yes.
Even if someone was to point out and say, well, we cannot take Professor Tour's contentions too seriously because he is, after all, a believer in God. Well, we could say that first thing, that's a genetic fallacy. Secondly, we could say the same thing about Dawkins. We should not take him seriously because he happens to be an atheist. But what we have here is we have a convergence between theist and atheist thinkers saying the king has no clothes. There's serious problems here. There's problems with freedom of speech. So Nagel is one example of others who've actually said so. Another thing I wanted to highlight, a few years ago, there was a documentary, No Intelligence Allowed. And in that documentary, we can see the persecution of people simply because they happen to believe in God. I remember interviewing the late Jonathan Wells about 5 years ago. And one of the things that he mentioned was he was supposed to publish a paper in a journal to do with cell biology. And he was simply asked after he submitted and it nearly went through, are you the Jonathan Wells from the Discovery Institute? And he said yes. And then he never heard from them again. And we have all of this data all across the world of people being persecuted because of their beliefs in science. So this isn't someone saying, I want to insert, this particular religious belief in a scientific class or in a scientific paper. No, it's somebody simply saying, I don't think that the narrative we've been given, that we get man from monad, we get a very simplistic, reductive program. I don't think this quite adds up. That's enough for you to get cancelled. So if someone was to ask me, what is Professor Tor all about? I see him all over the internet, but what is he all about? All I would simply say is, well, I would summarize Tor's perspective as the public has been misled, and I'm simply trying to unmislead them. That's what I get from your work.
Yeah, I would think that's a good synopsis, just that one sentence, and this quote unquote persecution. Now it's not like Bible level persecution. But it is professional persecution. Certainly does occur, and there are examples of this. I'm in my mid-60s. I just got into the National Academy of Engineering. I'm not an engineer. I'm a scientist. Why am I not in the National Academy of Science? Well, I was told more than 20 years ago, I was told by people in the academy that they'll never let me in. And what I told them, this was 20 years ago, I said, I've done as much as other people who are getting in. And there was a Nobel Prize winner in the room. And he looked at me, he says, no, Jim, that's not right. He said, you've done twice as much as other people getting in. It was 20 years ago, but you're not getting in because of my stance on these things. So when the National Academy of Science says that 99% of our members wholly embrace Darwinian evolution, that's because it's self-selecting. And the 1% that doesn't, they're going to die off soon. They're just older people that got in before this was a major issue. And so it's self-selecting. And so, yes, the professional persecution is real. And this does happen. So there's a stifling of free speech. And, so often this is what you see, the very bastions of those who are proclaiming free speech and free thought are the ones who are the most restrictive on free speech and free thought. They're the most restrictive ones. Those who are usually the ones shouting this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when it comes to freedom of speech in academia, it's undeniably linked to the wider cultural context. If we go back a few decades, we have President Reagan openly endorsing intelligent design. And the environment has only gotten worse in the succeeding decades. And what we've found is the worst type of persecution is self-censorship. And a lot of people who have come out, they held these views for decades. And they themselves, they stopped publishing research, or they stopped saying certain things because they wanted tenure, or they wanted to, just keep their jobs and whatnot. However, there does come a time where when someone does come out, they're quite resentful. Now, thinking of the secular, and this isn't religious in any way, evolutionary biologist, Lynn Margulis, she referred to neo-Darwinism as an Anglo-Saxon sect. Now, why would somebody use that type of dogmatic language for scientists, for people that are supposed to be, all about evidence and observation and experimentation and inference and theorization? Why is this type of language being used? You have Mary Midgley talking about evolution as religion, Michael Roos speaking about Darwinism as religion. So again and again, we were getting this type of data, this sociological data, that there's something seriously wrong. Now, I want to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, which is people have seen quite advanced level discussions from yourself with other scientists and the work that you've done. But going back to the pedestrian level, going back to the basic level, the understanding is life came from non-life. Scientists have worked it out. It's just a bunch of details. If you were to meet somebody on the street and they're to simply give you that perspective, what's the simplest way to explain to them that actually they've been misled?
Okay, the simplest way might be there are four classes of compounds that make us up. And we don't know how to make any one of those four classes. So of all the four classes, we can't even build any of them using something that would have mimicked what would be available on an early Earth. And even if you had all of those compounds, you wouldn't know how to assemble them. So in other words, we can take a cell, a living cell, and we can deconstruct it. We can take the pieces off of it. So the cell dies, we take the pieces off of it, and we can put all the pieces in individual bottles. And would we be able to put that cell back together again? And take the simplest cell that you can think of. Would you be able to put it back together again, even if you had all the pieces? Remember, we can't make any of those pieces. But even if you had them, could you put them together? And the answer is no. Nobody would know how to even go about doing it. So how it happened on an early Earth, before there were any laboratories, before you had these all in nice clean bottles waiting for you, how would you think of putting these together? And before you ever had even the chemicals to be able to put this together, that's how far we are. We don't know how life started. And even if we could somehow put them all in an ordered arrangement, we wouldn't know how to get that spark of life. We don't even know how to define that spark of life. If we just had a cell and it just died just in front of us, what is it that we would have to do to restart that cell to get it to be living again? We don't even have an answer to that. So we can't even carry out a resurrection of a cell where everything else is already in place. We don't even know how to do that. So there is still something mysterious about life. You know, in the old days, they used to describe this as being something called vitalism, that there was something vital to life that we didn't really understand. And there continues to be some truth to that. That there's things like this that we don't understand. And it's not the only thing in science that we don't understand. There are many things that we don't understand. And that's not to say, as a scientist, I could never say that we will never understand it. I've never used a God of the gaps argument. I would never use that because I don't know what people are going to be able to find in 500 years or in 1,000 years. So I can never use that argument. But there are many things in science that we just don't understand. We don't understand dark energy. We don't understand dark matters. Those are things we can't measure. We can't detect. We don't understand gravitation. I mean, gravitation, it wasn't until 2015 that we first measured gravitational waves that were predicted by Einstein in the beginning of the 20th century. So it took right about 100 years to be able to measure that. And it's an event that took place a long time ago. We were able to measure it. But still, what is gravitation? What is that force between two bodies? So when Newton talked about the gravitational pull between the Earth and the moon, people were accusing him of speaking of demonic things because what are you talking about? This force over a distance. What does that mean? And to this day, we can define what gravitation is, but to really explain it is a very hard thing. This force over a distance. What is this? So scientists, really basic things we don't understand, and life is just one of them. It's something that is very hard to characterize. We can describe what life the characteristics of life, but to describe what life is itself is a much harder explanation. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that comprehensive answer. Um, if I was to play devil's advocate and say, from again a pedestrian level, right, my quibble would be, well, Professor Tor, you've given a really interesting answer there. However, I've come across this article written in The Guardian, which says that Craig Venter created synthetic life form in the lab. And, people like him who are credible scientists, and how can you go against science? Shouldn't we be honest?
Yeah.
Sorry, did you there for a
Yeah,
second?
yeah. No, I heard you. Yeah, you just hung up for a little bit, but I got it. Yeah. So I'm very
Okay.
familiar with Craig Venter and what the work that he's done on synthetic cells. And let me tell you what he did. So he took a cell, and what he did is he has two different experiments he's done. One of his experiments is he looked at the genome of a particular cell. He went to a modern laboratory and he made a copy of that genome. Then he took the copy that he made and he put it in that cell and let it run the cell. He didn't make the cell. He just made a copy of the genome that had already been there. In another experiment, what he did is he took a cell, a very simple cell, and he started knocking out different pieces of the genome so that the cell didn't operate very well and the cell could not reproduce itself any longer. And when life can't reproduce itself, people say it doesn't have life because life has to be able to reproduce itself. So then he put that part of the genome back in and it started working again. And they called these synthetic cells, but he already had the cell. That would be like my having a car. And I take the little computer chip that controls all the electronics in that car and I take it out and I go to my laboratory and I copy that computer chip. I copy it, I make a copy of it, and I go and I stick it in that car. And then to claim I made that car, that'd be a very silly claim. I copied one piece of what was already there. I didn't make the car. I didn't make that cell had so many thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces and substructures. That car has so many thousands of pieces and substructures. I took off one little piece, copied it, and put it back in there. And that's what Craig Venter did. He did not make that cell from scratch. So the problem is it was what he did with the title of his article. Although I think in many ways he was a little bit more careful, but the press ran wild with this and called it the making of synthetic cell. But when you look at the details of what they do, it becomes far more pedestrian.
It does indeed. And I think this is the matrix that we're dealing with here. We have a juggernaut, a PR juggernaut when it comes to naturalism, putting out articles like this shamelessly saying, yeah, we got it. And then I remember a few years ago, I don't remember which TV program it was, but it was a very popular British TV program. And you had Richard Dawkins going and speaking to experts. And when it came to the origin of life, he obviously went to Craig Venter. And Craig Venter is there talking in his lab in his very confident way. And, the public is just lapping it up. So why are all of these people collectively working together for this goal? Because they want to create an impression. They want to create this particular veneer of certainty. We've got it, guys. We've got it worked out. Just the small little details are missing. And you're there with your hammer, chipping away at the veneer and showing that actually is hollow. So let's just get back into this matrix that we're dealing with in particular. How far does the rabbit hole go, according to you? Because you've been dealing with these guys for quite a few years now.
Well, I think one of the most telling things, Sabur, is this, that they will not engage with me. What they'll do is they'll send forward a YouTuber to engage with me. But I say that is like finding a 5-year-old kid and putting an explosive in their hand and saying, go to those special forces and pull this pin. I mean, they themselves will not come and engage with me. They will not come and talk with me. They will only put forward the poor fellows that don't know any better, that don't know anything. And so when you explain things to them, they just totally ignore it and keep talking the same nonsense. But scientists can't do that. And so that's why I tried to force their engagement. I challenged them. I named them by name. And I put these questions before them and I said, go ahead, answer any one of these. And by the way, you can grade your own papers. Here's the professor letting them grade their own papers. And if you solve even one of these, I'll stop talking. They won't engage. Why will they not engage? It's because they have not the answer. So yes, it is a veneer. They have not the answers. They are not there. The answers are not there. It is a house of cards. It is all smoke and mirrors. The answers to the origin of life clearly are not there. And I presume that things are going to chip away more. I don't think that their stronghold is going to get stronger over the years. I actually think that it's going to get weaker. I think that people are going to start standing up and calling them out on this even more, because their lack of coming forward is telling in itself. No answer is always an answer in itself. And that's what you see. And I have colleagues that come to me that will say they agree with me. They agree with me, but they will not come on my channel. They don't want to go through what I've gone through. They don't want to have to experience the same thing. But the chemists are seeing exactly what I'm seeing. So in science, we deal with this all the time. If somebody is wrong, the community gets together and they engage with them and they talk with them, and the thing is easily dealt with. It's easily dealt with. But in this, they won't come forward. So that in itself, and so that's the veneer that's coming down.
It is indeed. And one of the things I was thinking about when you were speaking is Francis Crick's book, Life Itself, in which he speaks about abiogenesis and also directed panspermia as two particular answers. And we have even the likes of Richard Dawkins, who recently, although he regretted it, again, pandering to the idea of directed panspermia when it came to the origin of life. So if somebody is to come along and say, well, aliens are a potential contender, then somebody else says, well, I think the inference could be towards something transcendent or powerful as opposed to an alien, then somehow it's not scientific, but it is scientific when you want to refer to an alien, even though that can lead to an infinite regress problem. So isn't it interesting that when it comes to, say, something like directed panspermia, they don't see the contradiction in even proposing such an absurd idea?
Yeah, I'm okay with this idea that aliens placed life here. I'm okay with that, but that just begs the question, because always what we're talking about is first life. Where did those aliens come from? So if it came from another planet, tell me about this. Just where did the aliens come from? You got to deal with that. So that doesn't solve anything. Yes, I'm amazed at how much they will throw at the doorstep of an alien, or how much they will throw at the doorstep of these alien creatures, even in our world, but they will not go near a benevolent creator. They will not go near that. But these mysterious creatures, these people embrace and they celebrate them, but they won't go near a benevolent creator who didn't just plant it here, but he had an intent, a good intent. They just want some totally neutral creature that's unexplainable. So yeah, it is interesting what they will dismiss. Because there's something in the heart of man that there's these writers, these Christian writers, have talked about this God placed vacuum in the heart of man, that if you deny God, there's still something there from childhood. One man said, I don't want to put upon my children this belief in God. Let them find this themselves. I said, oh no, your children already believe in God. They're born with a belief in God. You pull that out of them. It is there. It is something that we are born with. Children are aware of something else being there, and you see this communication even between them. It is something that society, that people try to pull out of the children. There's something already there, and there's this constant denial of God. It's a sad thing, and I even look at some of these people and what they're trying to put forward, and people will say, I was watching so and so atheist on the internet, and I said, watch them, learn about their families. Do you really want to be like them? Is that the type of person you want to be like? I mean, this is the outcome of this. But yeah, so they've not answered the question by saying that there's an alien out there, and yeah, they want to deny God, but they'll accept everything else. And as G.K. Chesterton, one of the greatest Christian thinkers of the 20th century, said, and I'm paraphrasing him, he said, when a person stops believing in God, they don't stop believing in everything. They start believing in anything. In anything. When you stop believing in God, you'll believe in anything. You'll believe in aliens, put it here, you believe in anything else. So what happens is when you deny God, you open yourself up to all sorts of crazy influences. And that's actually the outcome.
Absolutely. I have a second last question for you, and that is to do with two narratives which are being pumped out at the same time. I lost you there for a second. So the first narrative is intelligent design is pseudoscience. The second narrative is intelligent design is bad science. Yet they don't recognize for something to be bad science, it has to be at least science. It cannot be pseudoscience. How do you deal with the fact that they're making a contradictory argument often when it comes to the origin of life?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. As far as for myself, when it comes to the matter of intelligent design, I've never used that argument. I have friends at the Discovery Institute, and they're built around that. And I'm sympathetic to that. I am using just totally science. Science does this. And so what I say is that fundamentally, yes, I believe in intelligent design, because fundamentally, I believe God created the heavens and the earth and everything that is in them. So that's the fundamental. The details of this, the Bible doesn't give me. It doesn't give me this, but what I have is the book of nature. And as a scientist, that's what I do. I chase after the universe, trying to explain it. And this thought of intelligent design, there are people, and the reason I don't say this is I don't have an intelligent design monitor, meaning that I don't have a tool in my laboratory that I can look at something and it says, yes, that's been intelligently designed. There are proposals being put forth by people at the Discovery Institute and people not at Discovery, but related people, related scientists that are trying to put metrics on when something is intelligently designed. And I'm all for that. That is great. But because I hold my colleagues to a certain standard, I say, give me the tools in your laboratory which can show this can happen. They have no tools. Give me the tools in your laboratory that could make it. They have no tools. I hold them to the very tools that all chemists accept. So I don't use personally intelligent design as an argument. I just use the science itself screams out that it could not have happened the way that you're proposing. It could not have happened. And people will say, well, Tour, you shouldn't say that unless you have an alternate proposal. I say, that's not the way we do science. The way we teach our students to do science is, if you're looking at a mechanism and you find anywhere in that mechanism that there is a step that could not have happened that way, boom, you discard the mechanism and you start looking for another mechanism. We don't wait to have a different solution to discard that which we know cannot be. Your own science screams out, it didn't happen the way you're proposing. Now, as far as intelligent design being a science, again, I don't have a metric for that. I don't have a tool. I am sympathetic to it. And until in my area of chemistry, we have to have something that people will say, okay, that seems to be intelligently designed. And Sabur, it's interesting. Lee Cronin and Sarah Walker with their assembly theory. I personally think assembly theory does nothing to explain origin of life, and I've called Lee on it, and I've tried to speak to Sarah Walker, and she will not speak with me. Even when I was on the Arizona State campus, she refused to meet with me. She wouldn't even let me meet with one of her postdocs. But I don't see how their science itself explains anything on origin of life, because it cannot take hold of the chemistry. It's just Velcro balls sticking together. It doesn't take into account chemistry. But even what he's seeing is, he says it must have had a causal history. Boom! Lee Cronin and Sarah Walker have stepped right into the intelligent designer. They are just giving it another name. Their name is, it has a causal history. They will look at a molecule. They said if it has this index higher than 15, and you have more than one copy of it, it had to have had a causal history. It could not have formed randomly. I can, as a chemist, look at a molecule and tell you that's not forming in an explosion. If you have 2 of those or 3 or 4 of those, that has had a designer behind it or a causal history. So what's happening, Sabur, is the science itself, they're backing right into a creator. They are backing in, but they won't use that name. They'll use the name causal history. What's your cause? I mean, what name would you like to use? I mean, some people call it intelligent design. Other people, like me, I'll call it God. God did this. It's the same thing, and their science is bringing them into this. I would presume that Lee Cronin, he is the real deep thinker behind this. This is why when I challenged him in that Harvard debate, I challenged him. I said, Lee, you're going to have to speak about this, 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 and this, and I bet you won't. I'll bet you won't. You'll just talk about the formation of stars in your assembly theory. And he got up there and he didn't address any one of them, because he can't. He cannot. It does not address the science. But he talks about a causal history, and they're backing right into God.
Yeah, definitely. And I believe Sarah responded to you indirectly, but refused to engage. This is from my last, I'm just going off the top of my head, a few months ago, I believe she did that. And that's one of my concerns as well. You know, if I was a neo-Darwinist and I wanted to give a naturalistic explanation, and there's someone like yourself who was ready to talk, I would say, fantastic. We're going to have a fantastic debate. We're going to have a fantastic discussion. Rather, what you are facing is deafening silence from the opposition. And that must be quite jarring.
Yeah, and yeah, she was on a friend of mine's podcast, and he asked her about me, and she said, I think Jim Tours asks questions that are just straw men. I mean, how does the making of carbohydrates, how is that a straw man? How's the making of saccharides a straw man? This is what makes up life as we know it. These are straw men. This is as detailed as you can get. It's just the opposite of a straw man. And it was after that I said, meet with me. Meet with me in your office. I said, I'm coming to Arizona State. I'm giving a talk there. And my host asked her. She refused. I emailed her. She wouldn't respond. I said, how about just sending a postdoc? Let me just meet with one of your postdocs so I understand more of your assembly theory. She refused. And remember, no answer is an answer in itself. That speaks volumes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what we're seeing in terms of the opposition currently is these types of evasive tactics, which only further make the public more suspicious about their narratives. So, Professor Tor, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm a bit wary to extend the interview longer than this, because there is apparently going to be some Indian airstrikes soon in Pakistan. We may lose internet or something else. Things are quite tense here on the ground. And that might be why the internet was cutting out for a bit, because normally this is the fastest internet you can get in the country, the one I have currently. So it was great speaking to you. Is there any last message you'd like to give before we end?
Yeah, I mean, the message that I always like to give, that they put on out there to everybody, and I am a firm believer in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And if any of your listeners do not believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and they sincerely want to know, not just as an academic question, but they sincerely want to know about this, I'm willing to meet with them. So you can just send an email to tour@drjamestour.org, and we'll get together. And I have many great Muslim friends that I consider dear friends, that have been my friends not just for a couple of years, but for many decades. I've had them as dear friends, and so I welcome you, and God bless you.
Thank you for that open invitation. And something I find really interesting is neo-Darwinists and atheists, they try and trigger the differences between Muslims and Christians because of these connections that we have when it comes to intelligent design. And Paul Nelson said something really beautiful to me once. He said, when it comes to Darwinism, Muslims and Christians are like that.
Oh, yeah.
We can disagree theologically, we can have all those discussions, have them respectfully, but when it comes to the Darwinists, we're on the same page.
Oh, and yeah, Paul is absolutely right. I mean, we're on the same side of the barricade on this one. And I have imams write to me. They said, they say, I have my whole mosque, I have them listening to your stuff. Because we are one on this, and it doesn't even end there. I remember when I visited Saudi Arabia, and I had discussions with people about Abraham. I mean, a guy picked up the sand. He says, "This is where Abraham walked," and I said, "You really believe this?" He says, "I really believe this." I said, it is so good for me to meet somebody who really believes this as I do. And I could engage in them in conversations like few that I could gauge in the United States. When I was in Saudi Arabia and I met these men that really take hold of these things, the things that are written, that our ancestors walked in these areas, walked through this land, that this is their land, then we had great conversations together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Tour. I'd love to bring you back in a few months' time. I'm sure the audience is going to be loving the introduction of this video, because I have some very unique content of Professor Tour busting out some Urdu. So I think a lot of people are going to, really enjoy that. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. Good night.
Thank you so much. Khuda Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.